All right. Looks like we have some early birds. We have folks already joining in. So we've started a minute early so that we get logistics right and we just give people time to join in. So if you already joined, go on ahead and pop in the chat where you're joining from. We'd love to know who we're talking to, where from the world, and we have a really fun session. So we'll get started in just a minute.
I love an early bird. Punctuality is so important. I feel like it's a lost art these days.
All right, we have attendees joining in. Awesome. So we have Rich from Boston. Welcome, Rich. Great.
Hey, Rich is my neighbor. That's
I'll
great.
quickly chime in. Just a second. Awesome. So we'll get started. Drew, let's get started where you're from. I know that you have some envious weather going on, and then we'll get it going and get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Drew Frayre. I'm the Senior RevOps Manager at Akendo. Currently our only RevOps team member at Akendo, actually. And I hail from Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I just moved back here from Boston, actually. So, Rich, I was probably pretty close to you after 10 years in the city developing my tech career. Since I'm fully remote now, I can live wherever I want. So I moved back to Cape Cod, and I'm enjoying the lovely summertime weather here. 74 degrees, sunny, beautiful ocean. It's been a dream.
Awesome. So we were having a chat with Drew earlier, just talking about the weather, and I'm from Chennai, India. That's like the southern part of India, where 23 degrees is like a winter afternoon. So we're still enjoying what's our pleasant 28 degrees Celsius of, I would say, the transition between summer and winter. And so, yeah, so we have Boston, we have Chennai, right? We have good weather going on. And I think we have enough folks. So let's quickly get started. So we're going to start off with a couple of polls so we understand what sizes of companies people are joining from and what roles y'all are performing right now. So the polls just getting started. We'll get into the results in just a bit so we know what content is relevant to whom and ask more of that, right? So while that's going, welcome to Masters of Revenue. I'm Chara. I'm a co-founder at Revenue Hero. I run go-to-market here, so I have a slight brush with ops, which is like a for ops role where the kind of heavy lifting that the ops folks do, I'm just getting a slight taste of. And we have with us Drew from Akendo, who's been through multiple product launches and has a really interesting background. Drew, I'll let you get into it before we get into the interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I basically run revenue operations at Akendo, and we're a pretty unique case for RevOps because I service 5 go-to-market teams. We have a partnerships team, a success team, an onboarding team, a services team. Oh, actually 6 teams, a marketing team, and a sales team. So having 6 different stakeholders is really pretty intense. And what enables me to do it all is we run everything out of HubSpot. So if you are really well versed with HubSpot and you have all of your teams on it, it becomes pretty attainable to actually run RevOps across a bunch of different teams like that. In addition to the multitude of teams I work with, Akendo's also pushed 4 new products within the last 2 years that I've been with them. And you can imagine, Chara, like all the work and planning and strategy that has to go into a product launch. So I have quite a lot of experience in trial by fire pushing new products that I think is pretty rare for a company of our size, which is the 150 to 200 person mark.
4 products in a year just sounds like, I would say, it's like an ops Herculean task. I'm not sure how you manage it. And given that you also work with 6 different teams, there's all the coordination and how you get things going on time. Maybe that's one of the things that we should discuss, right? How to tackle 6 massive teams through 4 product launches. Maybe we'll get into that. Before we get into the questions, Drew, one of the things that I always like to uncover is how did you get into your current ops role and what your background is? Because we've had folks from multiple different backgrounds get into ops. Would love to hear your story.
Yeah, I kind of have a weird pedigree as far as ops goes, though I guess there probably isn't a standard pedigree for ops people in this day and age. I feel like we're all kind of figuring it out as we go along. But I actually started out of school, starting up and running a technical SEO agency. And we worked out of the Cambridge Innovation Center in Cambridge and worked with a lot of the innovative startups coming out of MIT. Which was really, really cool. We reverse engineered Google's algorithm. I worked with a guy who had a lot of experience with early AI, and we found some really cool strategies for boosting organic growth and doing really technical SEO working with Google. Um, from there, I moved on to HubSpot, where I worked in their white glove consulting program, kind of leveraging that marketing and SEO knowledge to help really high MRR customers at HubSpot achieve results. And in that time, I think I worked with around like 200 to 300 different companies across all industries and verticals. So honestly, like probably better than college for educating myself and getting myself a good career set for a tech career. Just working with all types of different stakeholders and organizations and different companies that can run that way. And then from there, I decided I kind of wanted to hold the reins myself, build the architecture for a really strong system. So I came on with Akendo as one of the early employees. I was actually hired on as a growth ops hire, whatever that means at the time. And then the growth ops team became a RevOps team in my time there. So I rapidly had to learn what a RevOps person does and what I was responsible for and how to do my job well. And as you mentioned before, it was definitely a trial by fire, pushing a bunch of new products at that point, servicing a bunch of stakeholders. So really, I've had to be really fast on my feet for a lot of my career.
Awesome. So I think, like you mentioned, ops doesn't yet have like a standard path to ops. I think SEO is I wouldn't have put those two together. But interestingly enough, I started off as a SEO content writer, right, fresh off of college. My guide was a single pager SEO Mars article, right? And that's what got me into software, for a better word. And from there, like I said, I'm not a true ops person. Like I said, I just have a brush with ops, running go to market at Revenue Hero, trying to bring marketing, sales, sales engineering all together. So folks in the audience would love to hear uh, how you got into ops and what your background is. I'm sure that there must be some fun stories that we'll get into when we're into the conversation. So while that gets started, Drew, I'd love to start off with, so given your background, given that you've already handled like multiple product launches, work with 6 different teams at your org, if you had to hire as a founder or like as a revenue leader, your first ops hire, what would you typically look for in that person? And how would you expect them to go about their first 90 days in their role?
Well, that's a great question, Chara, and one that is very close to my heart because I recently hired my first replacement ops hire here at Akendo. So I lost my direct report to another company and have been replacing that role. And I actually just got a new person recently. So I've been thinking a lot about what makes a good ops hire and what skills I want with this person. So like starting off, I think at a base level, if you're going to be successful in ops, you have to be very detail oriented and very organized. I'm lucky there because I have very, very poor short term memory. So I have a lot of great documentation practices and like organization that I use my everyday life even to make sure that I don't forget things and things stay as a priority when they need to be a priority. And I think that's what's honestly set me up for success in ops more than anything else is this kind of meticulousness. I've had people who I've worked with in the ops world who aren't as meticulous and kind of you need to have the what's the word I'm looking for, like the lineage of like a programmer. You need to have a programmer's mentality when you work in ops of pushing things, testing things before they're live, then keeping an eye on things and building things into your system that are going to check and recheck to make sure your system's functioning correctly. And in my company with 6 different teams, there's always these weird corner cases that pop up that hopefully I've built into my systems alerts and flags for me that let me know, hey, this thing's not functioning the way it should, or we didn't account for this. So I think like a meticulous and detail oriented person is going to be huge to start out with. I
Mhm,
think second most, being a technical native. Um,
mhm,
my career started out. I got into technical SEO because I was really good at building computers. And my former partner he built the NSA's supercomputer that they used for data monitoring. So he was also a big fan of hardware, and we kind of bonded over a mutual love of that. But kind of living online, building computers, working with software, and knowing how to troubleshoot things and make software work for you is
mhm,
huge. And if I can find someone who has a combination of those two things, I'm already off to the races because I know I can teach them whatever systems we have in place. But I think like the distant third to those first two is having a level of familiarity and some skill in whatever CRM or systems you're using. I know
mhm,
everyone uses different tech stacks, so it's really a hard ask to find someone who overlaps with those things. For instance, when we were hiring, I think we had 200 applications for the role, and around 7 of them had HubSpot specific experience. So it's definitely not where you can draw the line as far as this 100% has to be true.
mhm.
But yeah, some familiarity with the software or the tech stack, or even just like writing automation. If I have a potential hire who has experience with Salesforce, I know they're going to be okay in HubSpot. Same thing, the other way around. Like CRM experience can be huge there.
Awesome. So meticulousness, typically tech native folks do better, right? And then familiarity with uh, at least the ballpark of systems they must be working with, some CRM, for lack of a better word, and not just getting into that world fresh. It sounds like uh, gamers who tried installing and playing and troubleshooting games in the Windows PC world, of cracking DVDs, might also be a good fit. Would you agree?
Yeah, you absolutely caught me. I make computers because I'm a hardcore gamer and do a lot of gaming in my free time.
Awesome, great. So let's say you found that role, you found that hire, they're in the job. How would you lay out the 90-day plan for, let's say, a RevOps leader or an IC, right, who's going to be able to create impact, in that first 90 days and sustain?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting coming from my perspective because I have a lot of different stakeholders, and it's very difficult to kind of onboard someone and get them started across 6 different teams at one time. So I'm really struggling with that myself right now as I onboard my new person. And I think kind of coming in the door, it's ideal if you can limit your scope and your reach to focus on a single area, optimize that area, and then move forward. So, for instance, when I came on with Akendo, I focused entirely on the outbound sales motion, and I made sure the outbound sales motion was set up with a foundation that I really liked. We were looking at the correct data. They had the right automations to support them, and they had their dashboards and things to look at. And then once I had outbound sales in a good spot, I put a kind of stick in the ground, said, "Great, this is complete. Let's go look at our inbound sales motion." And then you can kind of find typically a pretty good way to move on from there with whoever has more overlap with a team. You can move on to that team next. But I really like taking it piecemeal. Again, I know some people, well, they say they say multitasking is a myth and that it's impossible to multitask and be really effective. That's kind of why I like to take my things piece by piece when it comes to a company, especially one that has as many different stakeholders and orgs as Akendo does.
Got it. So one of the things that RevOps runs into, typically, right? Like you mentioned, it's a good idea to start things one by one. Like make sure that your outbound is sorted and then your inbound is sorted. Any other process, pick up one process at a time, refine it, make sure that it's functioning according to plan, and then move on, right? So this leads me to the next question, where it's very easy as a RevOps person, especially when you deal with 6 teams in your cases or multiple stakeholders, to get stuck into that one process because of the asks that keep piling up, because of, hey, this thing's broken, or that I need a new process here, I need new automation. So while you're going through this, how do you avoid that trap of just doing the tactical things and requests, and make sure that you position yourself as a strategic um, part of the GTM org, and not just tackling day-to-day things and getting piled up with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chara. If you figure that one out, let me know. But as far as my strategy goes, I kind of run the ops platform at Akendo on two different levels. I have like a day-to-day kind of ticketing system that I've set up where people can input requests and things based on existing systems or things that aren't working correctly. And then I can triage and place those tickets into our backlog as basically running like a IT or success org, but internally. And then that allows me to prioritize the stakeholder requests. On the other side is kind of the larger scale things like the OKRs, the quarterly goals that we're working towards, where I am prioritizing problems or new things that need to be built with my key stakeholders, my execs, and
Mhm.
then those are typically the higher priority items. Of course, there can be stuff like if it's infrastructure breaking on the back end that we have an issue with, we can prioritize that above. But it's kind of a mix of these large scale goals, which are typically builds or optimizing certain arms of the business, and then gauging that against what we see in our day to day requests from stakeholders. And we currently use Slack. We have a Slack channel called Help RevOps where anyone can come in and they can ask questions. And then this functions both as like a good way to school your junior employees because you
Mhm.
can have newer employees working within that tool. And when someone comes and says, "Hey, why was this lead assigned to Sarah? It should have been assigned to Jamie." That's a great time for your newer ops hire to go in and look and say like, okay, diagnosing within Revenue Hero is super easy. You can pull up the detail log and all that. And they can look at why things were assigned a certain way. And then there's larger scale questions like, hey, can we have the capacity built into our sales pipeline to start to track churn reasons as well? So like it makes a good mix of those things, which I really like plugging my junior level RevOps hires into, and then I can focus on like the higher level OKR stuff.
Got it. So it's interesting that you mentioned ticketing. So how do you get your stakeholders to? Do you have predefined SLAs? Do you revise them month on month? Like, how do you get your stakeholders to agree to those SLAs? Do you have conversations where, or what is your policy on? Hey, these are things where I'm okay breaking my SLA, or is it all just airtight and SLA is when you get it?
Yeah, so typically our SLA isn't really around a certain amount of time for a response. Our SLA is around giving a delivery time for a question or for a request at the time within 24 hours of the request being made. So we will take it. If it's an easy solve, we'll solve it immediately. If not, we use an integration with Asana. So we like
Mhm.
will ticket react the post in Slack. It'll create a ticket in Asana. We'll assign it a priority and we'll assign it a due date based on where we're looking as far as other priorities live. And then that tracks back to the Slack task, so we can always update our stakeholders on that. But typically, yeah, it's based around we will give you a response within 24 hours, and we will let you know when it is possible to address. If it's possible to address, we'll give you a due date.
Makes sense. So when you say that, and given that you said you manage 6 different teams, Drew, I have to ask: do you have favorites where sales get quicker due dates and marketing gets longer due dates, or is it just fair to all?
It's really about the person asking the question. I found, and I've discovered like a new frustration, or I guess it's kind of a passion of mine. Is I've always focused on communication as a hobby of mine, and I think it's a weird thing to say. You don't hear a lot of people saying it, but it really is interesting the way different stakeholders in an org will try to communicate with you. And I always
Mhm.
try to say, like, talk to the RevOps help channel like you're talking to a robot or like you're writing programming. Like, this deal came through with billing active. Why did it advance to this stage? We have people come through and say, hey, why didn't this fire, and link to a record? And it's like, okay, that's really frustrating. I'm going to have to ask you 3 more questions about like what firing meant in this case, what you expected this to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm definitely biased towards my more effective communicating stakeholders, but I'm also dedicated to kind of cultivating an atmosphere for more effective communication in the org. And I'll ask clarifying questions in such a way that it's like, oh yeah, I should have thought about that when I was asking you the initial question because the way I phrased it makes no sense.
Yeah, makes sense. I think talk to ops like you talk to systems. I think should be a broader, commonly adopted practice across companies. Which leads me to asking: have you ever tried making a GPT of this within your org? Given that that's probably the best way to train folks to talk to ops, where they just strip out all the ambiguity and just get to the point so they get answers?
I haven't tried that yet, but that's actually a really interesting use case. I am subscribed to the HubSpot specific GPT right now, and I use that a lot for like creating my code snippets and things like that.
Uh-huh.
Because as experienced and as technical as I am, I still can't code worth a damn. So I lean on GPT a lot for that, and the HubSpot specific GPT has been very useful.
Awesome. Great. So given that we're speaking about tooling and GPTs, one of the things I noticed was the MarTech landscape came out in May. They now have 14,000 marketing sales products. You can't even open the PDF or the image on your laptop without it crashing, right? So given that that's the case, Drew, and RevOps has to kind of be a master of most of these apps, or at least know enough to be dangerous. How do you keep up with all the new products that are coming in to identify which one could enable a massive unlock for your org? Like, do you have specific places that you go to? Love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something that I find my network has to deal with as well. But I mean, realistically, they're all sending me an email via LinkedIn about the product at some point. I ignore all of those, of course, but once you get through the outbound requests, typically what I find is I talking to my network is really helpful on LinkedIn and things like that. I can count the amount of times I've had a use case where I've had a request come in and I've had no idea how to address it. Like we don't have the data for it or we don't have a tool that does it. And I'll turn to my RevOps leaders that I'm associated with on LinkedIn and say, hey, what are people doing for like job change flags in your target enterprise accounts? Or what are people
Mhm.
doing for point of contact identification, things like that? And get some truly amazing answers from people who are just willing to share it for free. I think leaning on your community of other RevOps users is huge. And that can either be in LinkedIn. I know there's typically like power user groups for whatever CRM or whatever larger piece of software you're working with. So I'm in the Discord for HubSpot power users and things like that. I'll ask questions in there a lot. And oftentimes, if you just follow those feeds, you'll see people heralding like the next new big thing. I think that was how we found out about Revenue Hero in the early days was we saw other people in RevOps talking about it, and we saw the comparisons to Chili Piper, which was the system we were using at the time. So it really does pay to keep your ear to the ground and continue to network, even when you have a great job or a great position. It's not like a one-way street where LinkedIn's just to find jobs. There's some really cool info out there.
Awesome. So, gaming background, putting computers together, naturally, you're on Discord groups. I expected Slack communities. I would have never guessed that there's a Discord group for HubSpot.
Oh yeah.
That's news to me. Yeah, awesome. Any other specific communities that you have in mind, Drew, before we move on to the next question that the audience should be aware of?
The other people who I lean on a lot is I have a lot of friends, ex-HubSpotters who I used to work at HubSpot with, who are really great to talk to, and then people who have gone out into consulting, like consultancies for RevOps, are really useful to talk to. I've talked to them like in with the perspective of hiring a consultancy to help with some of like the larger scale products that I might not have bandwidth for at the time, and really just
Mhm.
cultivated relationships with these folks where I'll reach out to some of these consultancies. I think Clear Pivot is the one I talked to most recently, and said like,
Mhm.
hey, what are you guys doing for this? Is this something I could hire you for? If not, what do you recommend? And they're always happy to lend a hand and give advice in that regard. So yeah, it helps to talk to the consultants as well. The consultants oftentimes have to be on the cutting edge of things because they're dealing with a couple different clients at once, or their clients have a lot of needs that might not have popped up with when you're in house like me.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, like you mentioned, consultants just have that eclectic set of requests. I just can't even keep up with how consultants manage to manage all of this. So one of the folks that we worked with earlier, they gave a great tip where they have specific hours of the day blocked off for Slack channels from each one of their customers, which kind of helps them organize the chaos, right? Awesome. So, Drew, I think the next thing and the one of the most popular questions that keep coming up in a lot of these RevOps conversations is, what metrics do you track in Okendo, for instance, or just what would you recommend RevOps leaders track in their org to pretty much just display the impact that they're having across the GTM org? and how do you structure it? Right? Do you have specific dashboards, specific tooling, and the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the secret sauce of any RevOps leader, right? Is what metrics you're tracking. The most important thing for us lately has been churn diagnosis, and to do that, I actually am extremely lucky, and I haven't mentioned this before, but my team of developers can pass any data you'd imagine from our Akendo app over to the system. So I have tons of amazing product data that I can build my reports and my triggers and my automations off of. And that's been
Mhm.
particularly useful with churn. So targeting 30, 60, 90-day churn, looking at that across the various market segments of customers we have, why are our enterprise accounts churning, things like that, has been extremely helpful in identifying how we can retain customers for longer, because that's what we've really set as a priority for this quarter and even like this year, you would say.
Mhm.
On the other side of churn, the yin to its yang is definitely closed won deals. I like to look at deal close rates across expansion and net new business. And of course, looking at those with regards to our segments as well, analyzing like funnel pickups, funnel conversion rates among our deal funnels, and also seeing deal won reasons and competitors displaced are huge for me. So I'm always looking
Got it.
at those things.
Awesome. And across these metrics, too, is there like a particular number or a particular trend, or just the number of tickets that RevOps is resolving that you typically use to see the impact that your team has on any of these metrics? Is there a process that you have or are thinking about implementing?
I wouldn't say there's a particular metric from among those just because of how
Yeah.
wide reaching we are, right? Like we're an octopus with tentacles in every different side of Akendo's business. So I'd
Mhm.
say like all of these metrics together. And what I do is I do a dashboard for each, right? I have a churn dashboard, I have a deal close rate dashboard.
Mhm.
And I guess the other thing is also attribution monitoring for the marketing side and the top of funnel stuff. I do a lot of
Mhm.
deal attribution as well, and that looks at like referrals from our success team, marketing efforts, which marketing efforts, everything sliced by UTM and things like that, and then looking at like referred business from CSMs and things like that. So there really is no one metric, but I'd say between like those five or so dashboards, that's what I'm looking at on a daily basis to see the impact and what I should be looking at next for impact and kind of prioritizing what our next OKRs should be.
Got it. And since you mentioned that you have awesome developers, I'm assuming that you get you have to drink from the fire hose in terms of the amount of data that they send over. Do you have like a dictionary or a process of sorts to translate those numbers to information that your sales team can use and your marketing team can use? Do you use like a product, or is it more of a in-house built software and process?
Yeah, we rely on in-house a lot, I would say. Since I worked at HubSpot, I consider myself in like the top 10% of HubSpot experts, and I lean on that knowledge a lot because I don't code and I'm not super technical in that regard. So we really do a lot of I would say like unifying of our metrics. So like we work with I think three different enrichment tools that will tell us if our customers have installed competitors.
Mhm.
What my job has been is to take those various data sources and tie them together into one unified field that will say if a competitor has been detected across any of those enrichment tools, and then building in obviously like ticketing and alerts to our sales reps that say like, hey, this big enterprise customer you just closed just installed one of our biggest competitors, like you might want to talk to them and see what's going on there. So it really is about like kind of utilizing HubSpot workflows and properties and customization to make sure that the things that they need are surfaced, and then we let
Mhm.
those. We recently overcame our level of custom properties, so we now have more than 1,000 custom company properties, which is another problem entirely. But kind of letting all that stuff hide beneath the surface, so that sales is only seeing the really clean, useful data that we know they need to see to do their jobs.
Got it. I think we have a question around that, Drew. I think Rich wants to know whether the information that you just spoke about, the dashboard metrics and whatever you track, whether you're able to do that in HubSpot, right? Maybe getting into a little more detail about how that's done might be helpful.
Yeah, Rich, that's absolutely all done in HubSpot currently. Kind of the way we do it is each of our data enrichment tools pushes a technologies field or a field that's related to what technologies a competitor or a customer has installed. I have built workflows that monitor for if any one of those three contains a specific competitor that we're looking for, it'll push the date that competitor was installed to a company record, which will then allow us to create like a churn ticket or an alert for the sales rep in the event that something like that happened. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn too if you want like the secret sauce. I'm happy to show you how I did it. I'm very proud of that process as well.
Awesome. Rich, let us know if that answered the question. Great. So Drew, because you mentioned custom property on HubSpot, I also want to make sure that I understood that right. Do you push this as a custom property, or is customer competitors like a custom object that you then have related to multiple accounts contacts? And is the custom object versus custom property a conversation that's not going to be contained in an hour, or is that something that you can quickly talk to?
Yeah, so far we're just pushing to company properties with a property like that.
Mm-hmm.
We basically have like Store Leads has technology, HubSpot has all technologies. There's one that's like all caps technologies for charm, I think. And then what we created was called Technologies Unified, and it contains the technologies we care about as a multi-select pick list, and they will check off and then associate a stamped date for each competitor when we detect those with our tools.
Awesome. And just as I expected, once we get into the tactical execution details, the questions are pouring in. So we have Shelly asking about what data sources you use to determine your ICP and what values you use for that.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Shelly. For our ICP, we look a lot at existing business for sure, and we have different ICPs for different customer segments. Since we have such great enrichment, we can very easily tell like the verticals, the employee sizes, and the like product offerings is really huge for us at Akendo, because I don't know if I've ever actually said what Akendo does, but we are we are an app for the Shopify store that helps people like cultivate reviews. You can also now set up a loyalty program with us. You can have product quizzes. You can set up a referrals program, and you can do surveys based around products as well. So Akendo is very specific to what type of vertical you might be in e-commerce, in addition to just being within e-commerce. We look a lot at like lifestyle brands, clothing, things like that, that will lend themselves well to the Akendo product, because we like to have customers who have products that have attributes, right? So like things like color, material, all make it a lot easier to use Akendo to have reviews that will show this kind of rich snippet in the reviews themselves. So to answer your question, for data source, we look a lot at size, we look a lot at vertical, and then very specifically within the e-commerce vertical, what type of products they're selling.
Awesome. And is there a specific source you rely on, Drew, like an Apollo or a Zoom Info, or is it more of form inputs? I think that's the follow-up from Shelly as well.
Yeah, so we actually rely entirely on our data enrichment partners for the industry. And we have been using Charm, Store Leads, HubSpot's Onboard. We did use Zoom Info for a time, but we're not using Zoom Info anymore just because of how expensive they were for what we were, trying to get out of them. But yeah, we kind of use a couple different ones to check our math there. And then we've learned and based on looking at that against customers who have crossed over and started with us, we've seen how accurate those are. And that was part of why we dropped Zoom Info, was the reporting we were seeing wasn't super accurate. But like Store Leads is Shopify specific. They have a metric called Shopify Rank, which will rank how large a store is against all of the stores on Shopify. So that has been super key in us figuring out if they're in the right vertical for us.
Awesome. Did I also hear Charms? Is that another data source?
Yeah, I think it's called charm.io.
Got it. Charm.io,
Yep,
Store
charm.io.
Leads. Got it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Charm and Store Leads are killer with each other there.
Awesome. I think that's a good segue into, Drew, what are some of the products that you are really excited about, either products that are, coming up and you've heard about in your communities, and just in general, if you have like a favorite set of products that you would recommend folks go check out, either that's about to go big or things that you already use.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me pull up my list.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of products that and Kendo has been very good to me. They have let me purchase and trial and try many different things as a way to get to where I want to go. So we've kind of evolved the tech stack a ton in the 3 years that I've been here. And where
Mm-hmm.
I ended up with HubSpot has been huge. HubSpot is
Mm-hmm.
what we're building everything off of. We use it for all of our go-to-market teams. We're
Mm-hmm.
we're one of the most complex HubSpot instances according to my CSM. We constantly have feedback and new feature requests for them. Um, in addition to HubSpot, Clearbit, Store Leads, and Charm all super useful for improving our company data that we have based around even existing customers and
Mm-hmm.
net new leads, things like that. Revenue Hero is all you need for meeting routing and setting up assignment logic. We use Revenue Hero for like anything from our success and our CSM's team all the way out to our sales teams as well. So we lean on Revenue Hero immensely, and we love the tool. It's very easy, especially with me. Like if I'm have an employee who's leaving the company or going on vacation, it becomes a lot easier to remove them within Revenue Hero because it'll flag like everywhere that that employee is. So thank you, Char, for that feature in particular. That helps keep me sane. In HubSpot, I'm looking at like every workflow I've ever built, trying to see if the person I'm removing is like involved in a assignment flow somewhere. So that's been huge. Um, in addition, we also use, I don't know if I mentioned Seamless as well, which is another prospecting and user intelligence tool. And then Zapier is big for writing cross integrations with HubSpot and other pieces of technology that we use. We use Zapier quite a bit. And then LinkedIn Sales Navigator, of course, for your prospecting teams. Our partners team uses it and our sales team uses it. And then
Mm-hmm.
Intercom for our success endeavors and our bot creation. We use Intercom. We don't use HubSpot's onboard bot feature, which is a rare time where we've like kind of moved away from HubSpot. And then I use Whimsical for everything in my life. I don't know if you guys know Whimsical. It's basically a what's that? What's the main tool people use for storyboarding?
Lucid chart.
Lucid Chart. Yeah, it's like Lucid Chart, but I think it's a lot cheaper and much easier to work with. I have all of our assignment processes and all of our builds that I've done in a Whimsical, which is updated and screenshotted regularly and shared with stakeholders. So that's kind of how I keep the ship on the right track as far as everyone being aligned with how things work and what a specific lead should go through when it comes into our systems.
Awesome. So we'll summarize that list, and it's always great to hear another customer's name come up in the list of tools that you use. Seamless happens to be a customer, and I think Whimsical, when I used to be in product management, was a lifesaver. Right, when you had to communicate a really complex workflow, nothing like it. Looks beautiful, easy to use. So that's great. All right. So, given that this is the number of tools that you use, Drew, one of the things that I found hard at Revenue Hero's own scale is just adherence from different teams to using these products in a certain way and sticking to specific processes, right? For instance, we have a process where we ask the order form to be updated in a channel the moment we get a closure, both for team morale and just to make sure that you have all the information in one place, right? So how do you enforce, or rather just make sure that processes like those are followed, right? And how the RevOps department is able to influence those processes and make sure that they are actually adhered to, especially in a remote setting, right?
Absolutely, and I think I've actually evolved in this in the 3 years that I've spent with Akendo, as
Mm-hmm.
far as what I think makes for a great process and a great process implementation. The old Drew would have told you like I like to push tasks and alerts to people when things need to be done. But what that turned into 3 years later was all of our reps had like an insane amount of tasks they weren't actioning. No one would even they turned off their alerts for when new tasks were assigned, and it just wasn't helpful. What I've found most important of all is to like give them skin in the game with an SLA. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, like our sales reps, when they closed a deal, an onboarding ticket would be created for our onboarding team, and the sales rep would be required to enter a bunch of information into the onboarding ticket so that the onboarding person can do their job. Obviously, hard to get a sales rep to do anything after they've sold a deal. That's kind of traditionally where their job ends. But what I kind of built my system around was the actual onboarding tickets would assign to the sales reps that closed the deal. So an onboarding ticket would be created. It would be owned by a sales rep, and they would have to enter all their information. And HubSpot would not allow them to advance the ticket to the point where an onboarding rep would be assigned until that information was in there. So they have their name on it. We know exactly who's responsible for it. Everyone in onboarding staring at this ticket that's owned by a sales rep, drooling, waiting to start their onboarding. I really like to be creative with this stuff and ensure that people have ownership of the thing that they're supposed to do until they do it. And at that point, they're free. It'll be moved on to the next part of the process. But it makes them super accountable. And they have weekly reporting that they're going to look at in like their sales weeklies that show like, okay, here's all the onboarding tickets that are still owned by salespeople. Here's how long they've been open. And you guys can all review this together and see like if Joe has an onboarding ticket that's been open for 7 days and he still hasn't put in when they're expecting to launch, Joe's obviously going to get reamed out in front of the rest of the sales team. So it's kind of fun. I like the enforcement part of my job.
Awesome. So seems like HubSpot is the answer for one more of these questions. Just really getting creative with HubSpot, setting up some processes and workflows, and most importantly, making all these metrics visible and accessible for the rest of the team, so that if process isn't adhered to, it's not necessarily your responsibility. It's just that each team's owner then gets to know that, hey, this needs to move. Right? So when you set up these processes, Drew, how do you kind of democratize that process amongst individual teams? Do you run training sessions, walk them through new processes on a periodic basis? Do you maintain internal knowledge bases? Could you just talk through how you enable your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think enablement's really huge and something that a lot of RevOps leaders can get wrong very easily early on in their careers. What I've found works is I have a standing library of processes broken down by team. So we use Notion, which I think shares an investor with us. So we use Notion. But basically, I have a RevOps processes folder, and within that, I have all the sales processes, all the success processes, all the onboarding processes, and that'll link to both like the whimsical diagram that shows how everything works, and also I'm a big recorder of videos. You can tell I got a face for video, and I record tons of videos on like an example of how to do something because you know that there's going to be new hires, there's going to be people who forget who are going to watch this stuff, and I can see the Loom views that my videos get every day. Like people are rewatching this stuff pretty often. But I think the most important thing is that they know where to find it. You can build all the awesome documentation and videos in the world, but having that centralized in one page in Notion and then broken down by team is kind of the huge piece, so that they know where to go and where to find it when they need it.
Got it. I think Notion sounds great for that. I have to ask: is there a Notion template by Drew out there in the wild that folks can go check out? If not, I think there should be one for all the RevOps folks to duplicate and use in their own arcs.
There really should be. I'm working from the standard page, just the Notion page, and I've built columns for each of the teams that I work with. But yeah, I guess it would really depend on how many different teams and stakeholders you're working with. Like the Akendo RevOps processes template would not work well for other companies, or they'd have to delete like 3 of the columns. But yeah, it's not rocket science as far as just partitioning which team goes to what, and then make sure you have cool icons for everything. I will say.
Awesome. And whenever we speak documentation, Drew, one of the things that we tried building out many moons ago in a hackathon was how you keep these documents up to date? Because what we've seen is, especially in multi-department setups where there are complicated processes, a lot of your documentation expires with time, with addition of new tooling, etc. Do you have like a review timeline that's put in your calendars? How do you make sure that your documentation stays minty fresh?
Yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of that has to go from like work from your documentation when you can. Like when I have a question about a lead assignment, first thing I'll do is look at my documentation, see if the lead assignment makes sense from there. Next thing I'll do is go into the actual workflow, the infrastructure go into Revenue Hero and see if it matches what the documentation says should happen. Because if you're working from your documentation, it has to be up to date, or it's not going to make sense to you. So oftentimes I make sure all of my documentation is linked. So like all of my HubSpot workflows linked to the documentation that talks about them. So we're typically pretty good. Like I said, I have very poor short-term memory, so I will always make the change to both when I'm changing one or the other. And kind of we have a change log in place that shows when the last time something was updated. So we can kind of go back and say like, okay, this page has been updated a long time. I feel like we've changed the demo flow since then. Maybe we should go in here and take an extra look at this.
Awesome. So start from documentation. I think it's a great way to go about things, right? Do you do like do you have, and again, given that everything's on Notion, and I'm assuming you have many links, do you have like an enterprise search product that you use to access these links, or do you think Notion's good enough to navigate all that chaos?
I think I'm probably pretty rare in that I have a really disciplined folder hierarchy and naming convention system. But if you didn't, I could see there could be a need for like an enterprise level search or organization tool there. I can typically find everything that I need to find, and it is nice when you have like a team of people because you can very easily separate out the responsibilities. So when I had an employee working with me, that person was in charge of all assignment flows. So it was like very easy when a request comes into the RevOps channel. If it's a request about how something was assigned, we know exactly who should handle it. It's Nick. And then if there's a change, there needs to be a change to assignment somewhere. We know who should handle it. Conversely, for like onboarding, I built our whole onboarding process. So if there's a question around that, pretty easy to know that like that's my responsibility. And if there's documentation that needs to be updated, obviously goes to me as well. So I do like kind of having your RevOps team segment and own various parts of the business. It makes it a lot easier to tell who's responsible for something rather than people just working on things as they come up or like being round robin requests.
Got it. So is it fair to say that your team already owns specific parts of Notion, and so it's not too labyrinthine for them to have to go navigate too much? Each one knows which page to go to already.
Exactly. We have like the RevOps section, and then we have the HubSpot processes section, and that's where everyone goes, and then that's broken down by team.
Awesome. So slightly controversial maybe, but depending on company stages, is there any scenario where you would recommend Salesforce over HubSpot, and why? If not, why even then?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have worked with both systems. Back when I was at HubSpot, we had clients who were on the HubSpot Salesforce integration pretty often, actually. Like you find that's a really common tech stack where people will use HubSpot for top of funnel stuff and then pass to Salesforce once leads have qualified. I think both systems have their strengths. What I've always said is that Salesforce is really good for very detailed sales process changes, and it can go a lot deeper than HubSpot can go as far as like assignments flow, like lead routing, things like that, and data and reporting obviously are Salesforce's strong points. But HubSpot makes up for it in kind of ease of use. The UI is really excellent to work with, and it expands to a lot of different areas very quickly, as I've seen with Akendo, like loading all my different teams in here, having pipelines for everyone. So when it comes to like holistically running a business, I'm a big fan of HubSpot. I think if you are just looking at running your sales segment and reporting on that with like a lot of minutia and have some pretty rigid reporting requirements, then that's the situation where I'd fall back on Salesforce.
Got it. Awesome. So, Drew, I also remember that you mentioned specific communities where you go to for RevOps conversations. Do you have specific people that you follow either on LinkedIn or on these communities that the rest of the community should be aware of? Folks who put out great content, great processes, great templates, anything that the rest of the community can benefit from.
Yeah, the big one I'd recommend for HubSpot is called the Sprocketeers community. I believe they both exist on LinkedIn and also as a Discord group, and that's so much interesting stuff gets flagged there. So I'm a big fan of that one. The other one I participate in quite a bit is the RevOps Co-op in LinkedIn as well, and that's more generalized RevOps stuff. I'm sure there's also tons of Salesforce power user groups if you're a Salesforce RevOps guy. But those are kind of the two I would start out with. And you will see cross promotion among them for other groups and more specific groups. If you're like a RevOps for like a partners team or a sales team, you can find more specific groups. But I kind of like the larger groups because you get a lot more faces on your posts when you're asking questions or promoting something you're doing.
Got it. Awesome. So Sprocketeer, and shout out to RevOps Co-op, who's a partner of ours as well. Have had some great conversations there and some great insights. Great. So I think I know that we're towards almost headed towards time, and I know, Drew, given that you're in ops, calendar is probably chock full of meetings. So I'll just end this with, what is the most ridiculous ops request that you've gotten? And did you end up implementing it, or did you walk away from that request?
Yeah, that's a great request. And this actually goes back to pretty early on in my ops career. My request from my support stakeholder was they wanted a semi-pooled ownership assignment for inbound support tickets. And what this means is when a support ticket comes into the system, if they haven't had a support ticket recently, it goes to any rep within the kind of assignment flows that we have. We have a different assignment flow for geography and then size of company. But they wanted, if a new ticket were to come in, it would go to the same rep that a previous ticket had gone to, if within X number of days of that last request. So it was kind of crazy. Like we had to, in order to do so, we had to track like when the last request had come in, how many days from that it was, reset the owners after that time period. It was so much work for something that I really just don't think people care if they talk to the same support rep if they come in within a certain number of days. So modern Drew would have 100% pushed back on that, but new fledgling RevOps Drew actually went in and built that crazy system, and it worked.
Oh, wow.
But looking back on it, I kind of cringe and say like, oh man, if I knew what I knew now, I would never build such a crazy system.
Got it. So funnily, I used to work at Freshworks, where we built Freshdesk, the support help desk, and that was one of the most commonly asked feature requests as well. Thankfully, we managed to push back and not build it out as a feature, right? I know that we're almost on time, so just one question leading from that, Drew, is, so fledgling Drew went on ahead and built out that process, ended up making it work. Today, when you get questions like these, where it seems like the stakeholder on the other side feels like it's going to be really useful, they have a strong reason to ask for it, but you feel like, hey, it's too complicated, not going to be helpful. How do you frame that conversation? Do you point people towards bandwidth and agreed upon decisions? Do you typically have a conversation with a different stakeholder in the org to kind of democratize the solution? How do you handle these difficult conversations as an ops person?
That's a good question, Shara. And kind of what I've learned here is not necessarily pushing back, but when a stakeholder, a RevOps customer, comes in through your door with a request, I don't take requests. What I do is I take problems. So tell me the problem that you're having, and I will offer you the solutions that I think are the best ways to deal with that, and we can pick from among those. And if you're not happy with those, we can tweak them, or we can look at what you think is the best way and maybe find a middle ground. But really, your RevOps stakeholders should be coming to you with problems, and if they're coming to you with solutions, they either don't trust you enough, you haven't shown enough ownership over your domain, or they need to be shown that like you have this whole vast wealth of different processes and solutions in play that they might have never even thought of, and kind of hold you as a subject matter expert rather than a solutions person or a support rep for basically them to go to and fix things in the CRM. So that's really something that I've learned over the 3 years at Akendo is people should be coming to you with problems, and you should be guiding them to the right solutions for those problems rather than the other way around.
Got it. I think, which means as a RevOps leader, you almost spend a lot of time helping teams prompt engineer their questions to make sure that it's hey, I have this problem, rather than, hey, can you go implement this process so I fix this problem for myself, right? So the more and more I talk about RevOps with different folks, Drew, it's starting to feel like it's an internal product management role, where instead of building out a product, you're building out processes for GTM arcs, take multiple feature requests or processes requests from teams, and pretty much build out like a massive deep GTM product that then pushes results, right?
I think that's a
Awesome.
good way to think of it. I've always thought of myself as like product adjacent, but we're
Mm-hmm.
not building for the product, we're building for the teams, and it's very rewarding. Like every day I get to come into work and I don't know what I'm going to face necessarily as far as questions or challenges, but I get to be very creative in my solutions to these every day, and I feel like I'm challenged and I grow every day, which is pretty rare for a job that you've been at for 3 years, right? Like you'd think at a certain point it would get boring and it would settle down, but it really just doesn't. I guess pushing 4 products probably helps with that, but you never
Yeah,
know.
and of course all the at times ridiculous requests just keeps it interesting, right? And Drew, last question, I promise. You said that you've been lucky enough to get a whole lot of engineering support from your org. Would you say that for a RevOps org, in a tech native company, engineering support from day one for the org is crucial, or would you say that there's enough no code, low code tooling that you can use to set things up to a point where it's not necessary that you need engineering help to build out a well functioning RevOps org?
I'd say until the point at which you are concerned with churn or upselling or expansion motions, it is not 100% necessary. But even early on, there are great learnings you can get from your existing customers and passing that data over that are going to be helpful for like Abigail was asking, compiling, or Shelly was asking, compiling ICPs, like getting that data on the existing customers and what they're doing within your tools helps
Mhm.
so much, even from like the marketing and then top of funnel stuff. So I would say, yeah, you probably should consider it at the very least. But if you're working anywhere with like churn or expansion sales or upselling, is 100% necessary, because you need to know what your customers are doing if you want to impact any of those 3 buckets.
Awesome. Drew, it's been a great conversation. I think one of the things that I was hoping that Drew would put on his original title, which is RevOps Wizard, right, Drew? So I think we've learned a lot of your magic tricks on this call. Thank you so much for taking time and walking us through your experience. It's been a great conversation. And where can folks find you? Where do you hang out other than the Discord for HubSpot?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys can find me on LinkedIn, Drew Frayre. I am listed as a RevOps wizard and HubSpot expert there. But yeah, feel free to request me there and ask me any follow-up questions that you have. I love talking about all things RevOps, and also like I'll talk about technical SEO and HubSpot, like in-depth technical stuff all day. Always interested to see what people are doing in those silos as well.
Awesome. We'll be sure to list all of those places. Drew, it was really great having you. Thank you so much for taking time for the conversation. Everybody who dialed in, thanks for joining Masters of Revenue. We're wrapping up the Ops edition of this, but next month we have really exciting Demand Gen edition for Masters of Revenue, where we get hopefully Demand Gen wizards to join in and share their experience and learnings. Drew, this is really good. Thank you so much.
Of course, Shara, anytime.
All right. Have a good one.